Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are going to be looking at the art made in the northern part of Europe during about the exact same time that really fantastic things are happening in Florence, where we've just looked at. And so, our goals today is look at some of the early Flemish art, early Northern Renaissance art made in the first half of the 15th century. And as a way of getting there, I'd like to first introduce you to the art and practice of oil painting. Because so far we've talked about tempera painting, and so far we've talked about fresco painting, but today will be a good opportunity to talk about oil painting. And it is not surprising that these different media all have different advantages and disadvantages, and we'll have a chance to talk about those now. So as a way to begin, let's think about this painting as a way to get there. This work by Robert Campon, painted about 1428, is called the Merode Altarpiece. And although on your screen it might look the exact same size as the Arena Chapel, this work is 4 foot by 2 foot. So this central panel here is 2 foot square, 2 foot by 1 foot, 2 foot by 1 foot, more or less 4 foot by 2 foot. And this gets us to a really important distinction between fresco painting and oil painting. So I call your attention again to something we looked at last time. This is Masaccio's Holy Trinity, pardon me, tribute money. And when we talked about this, I said, that's probably 15 feet or so. That's my guess, and maybe 15 by 5. And that is not a huge fresco painting, but it is in fact a fresco painting. And 15 by 5 is 75 square feet of painting, whereas this is a combined total of 8 square feet of painting. And this is one of those differences. Fresco paintings can be as big as you can make a wall or ceiling, and the Sistine Chapel is huge. And oil paintings can only be as big as the support upon which you can place them. So this is wood panel. We've seen wood panel before. Eventually we'll get to canvas. And the reality is you can't make canvases as big as a ceiling. So comparatively, oil paintings are smaller. I think the biggest oil painting I've ever seen was 30 foot by 20 foot. And to be honest, that's bigger than my first apartment, but it's still small compared to a fresco painting. Because we're dealing with two different scales, our artists are working at two different speeds. Oil paint, because it dries slowly, allows artists the opportunity for a great amount of detail. And we've seen some of these details already. In contrast, fresco painters are working quickly, and there is a decided lack of detail in all of that. I remember that we talked about the beard and the Santa Claus beard. Oil paintings, art makers will put enough care to have individual whiskers, which is not what fresco painters can do. Color is another distinction. In oil painting, the art makers can completely be in control of color in their works. And this is color not only as it pertains to hue, which is one of the 6 major colors, value, which is the lightness or darkness of a given hue, and also saturation. So we haven't talked about saturation, but we have a little bit. When I described fresco paintings, I said they often appear to be dull or muted and sometimes a bit like their pastels. And what that means suggests is that they are low in saturation. In this instance, saturation involves the relative purity of a color. And you can have really, really bright red or a dull, muted red. Think about burgundy, the color burgundy. That is a desaturated red. It's red in which gray has been added. Oil paint's fantastic in that if you have blue pigment, yellow pigment, and red pigment, you can mix those together to create our secondary colors. And if you have white pigment and black pigment, you can make a gray pigment. And now by adding white, you can get shades and tints. And by adding gray, you can desaturate the purity of a color to make it much more subdued. So as an oil painting, Robert Campon can have bright reds, saturated reds, and then a variety of reds throughout all of that. Oh, if I can find it in a hurry, I'll give you a great example of all of this. This is a painting by Jan van Eyck. We've looked at him before. Look at the different values and saturations of red just in this one ruby, which is one little small bit in the crown of God, which is one small bit of this whole composition. Like, look at that. Look at these. That's the kind of detail and color that we're dealing with when it comes to oil paint. Nothing like this exists within fresco paint. Oil painting, when treated well, can last a long time. Fresco paintings, when treated well, will last until the wall falls down. And so there are different levels of durability. Oil painting is fine. This is a 700 or a 600-year-old painting. Everything is good. But a fresco painting can last as long as the wall is upright. So we've talked about size, we've talked about color, we've talked about detail, we've talked about the speed. Let's talk about mistakes. As I mentioned, when you're dealing with a fresco painting, when the plaster on the fresco is dry, it's been tattooed on. There's no fixing it. It is not on, it is in the wall. But when you're painting with oil, everything is on. So you can fix mistakes, you can cover things up. So if I were to have an oil painting of me and a woman I dated when I was 32, I could have her painted out or painted over and have my beagle put on instead. Not that I would ever do this, but one could in fact do it. So oil painting is developed in the north and it eventually comes to Italy. And although some art makers like Botticelli are still working in tempera at the end of the 15th century, by the 16th century, oil is reigning supreme just because it's easier to work with. I mean, really, do you want to be dealing with spoiled eggs every day in order to make paint? No, you don't. So oil painting is remarkably practical and is easy to work with and has all kinds of fantastic benefits. So let's return to this composition, the Merode Altarpiece, because it will allow us to do some really interesting stuff. This is a triptych. It is a three-paneled altarpiece. In the center, we have an Annunciation scene, which by now you recognize with no problem. On the left-hand side, you also recognize the patrons who have paid for this work of art. And on the right-hand side over here, we have St. Joseph working in his wood shop. Let's talk about all three of these panels. Panel number one is the leftmost panel. You can see we have our two patrons, Bob and Rebecca, kneeling in front of an open door. He has removed his hat as a sign of respect. She has her hair covered as a sign of modesty, and they are shown as if they are remarkably wealthy. Think about their clothing, their hats. He even has a coin purse next to him. That says something pretty important about his level of wealth. They're in an outside courtyard, and in the background, you can see this architectural structure here that steps up and then steps down. That's called a Flemish gable, and this is a crenellated wall. And in a little while, I'll show you a picture of what Flanders looks like to this day. I mean, Flanders is now called Belgium, but that architecture is still there. And Robert Campin, at this point in his life, was painting in Ghent. I'll show you a picture of Ghent. It looks just like this. You can see a little view of Ghent out this door, a man standing here, and then there are carnations here in the central part of this leftmost panel. And carnations are traditionally a symbol for Mary. On the other side of this, we have St. Joseph. He's working in a wood shop, and I ask you to think about when and where St. Joseph lived, because where he is right now, he is clearly in modern day Ghent, and when he is clearly 14th, 15th century Ghent. Poor St. Joseph, the guy went to bed in like Jerusalem around the year 10, and he woke up in Ghent around the year 1430. Poor guy's been transported. This is Ghent. It's Ghent. There's the Cathedral of Ghent. And the shutters have been lifted, as you can see, to show the window out here. I think the shutters are pretty fabulous, actually. And he is at work doing good stuff. So what's he doing? There's Ghent. What's he doing? Well, in this hand here, he's grasping a board, and in this hand, he's actually holding a drill. Here's a detail of him. And sort of understand what's going on here, we'd have to talk about the things that are present. So why might he be drilling a board? And in order to understand this, it's kind of silly, and you probably haven't seen this, but your teacher can find it on the Google machine. There's a famous episode of I Love Lucy, a sitcom, I'm guessing from the 50s, in which Lucy goes to Italy and works in a vineyard. And the famous part of this episode, and it's probably the only part I really know, is Lucy stomping grapes. And there's like this gigantic, I don't know, 300-gallon barrel. There's all these grapes in it. And there's two women, I think, Lucy and an Italian woman. And they're stomping and prancing and squishing the juice out of the grapes. And eventually Lucy and the Italian lady get into a fight. But that's step one of making wine. Take grapes, stomp them until the juice comes out. And then you have to separate the juice from the pulp, because you make wine with grape juice, not grape skins. And so what they then do is take, if the barrel is like a 50-gallon barrel and it's round, they take a 50-gallon round barrel top, put it on the stomped grapes, and because it has holes drilled in it, you push that down. The juice comes up through those holes, the pulp settles to the bottom, and that's the beginning of your winemaking. It's suggested that this is what St. Joseph himself is doing. And honestly, that Joseph, the stepfather of Christ, would be making something to do with wine, the blood of Christ, makes perfect theological sense. The other thing that's interesting around this tabletop is this thing here. There it is. What do you think that is? Because even if you look at it for a second, you might be able to get there. And beyond that, we have all kinds of cool stuff, right? Look, he's got an axe, a saw, like what looks to be wrench, a little hammer, a chisel, some nails, another kind of drill here. There's some shavings around and other nails, but what's that? And if you thought, hey, Brian, that looks like a mousetrap, I would say bravo. It looks like a mousetrap, doesn't it? And then you might be thinking, Brian, why is there a mousetrap there? And I would say, hey, I'm glad you asked. St. Augustine often described Jesus as the bait in the mousetrap that was meant to snare Satan. Right? Jesus' job was to die for our sins. And so this speaks to that relationship. And there was a religious confraternity in Ghent at this time, the Saint Joseph's, the Order of Saint Joseph, and they had mousetraps as one of their symbols. And so this might speak to that. Here is a depiction of the interior of this room, and there's all kinds of things we can talk about in terms of what we see. The very first artifact we did during our class together was the "What do you see and what does it mean" artifact with the Arnolfini portrait. And we're not going to do it again, but this image is as rich as that one in terms of the things that are present. And so to begin with, in the back window here, there are little coats of arms, one for the husband and one for the wife. And one of those is the coat of arms for the Engelbrecht family. I think that's pretty entertaining because Engelbrecht quite literally means angel bringer. And that's exactly what's happening here in this Annunciation scene. The angel is being brought to Mary. So let's think about the things we see around this room, because there's something pretty cool that you might not have noticed yet, but we're going to get there in due time. To begin with, we have a vase with 3 lilies. And the vase works out really well with 3 lilies because 3 is Trinity, lilies are flowers, which speaks to fertility, and white is a symbol of purity. Beyond that, we have our angel Here it is. It's a ginormous angel. If this thing stands up, it's going to bump its head on the ceiling with that gesture of blessing, these really fabulous wings, some nice curly hair, a cool bandana, wearing some fun clothes. And the angel seemingly has just whooshed in the room to talk to Mary, and Mary is so overwhelmed by the arrival of this otherworldly, heavenly object that she's not even putting down the book. Interestingly, in the back wall is this. It's a water basin. And water basins often have a symbolic function which speak to the baptism of Christ. Right? So Christ is baptized, the washing away of sin. Here is a water basin hanging on the back wall. On the table, here you can see it on the left and a detail on the right. In addition to the flowers in the vase, you can see a couple of other things. One, look at the candle. The candle has only recently been extinguished. Please note all of the smoke coming out of that. So the angel, our angel Gabriel, has whooshed through the room with such force that two things have happened. Number one, the candle has been extinguished and it's now smoking, which is exactly what candles do when you blow them out. And secondly, the book on the table, the pages have begun to flutter. And I got to tell you, Mary is a PhD student waiting to happen because she is so locked on to her reading of the scriptures that she hasn't noticed either the arrival of a gigantic angel in the room or the gust of wind that seemingly has extinguished a candle and fluttered the pages of a book. Go, Mary, go. She's wearing the red and blue uniform that we expect her to wear. And I ask you to think about the construction of space in this room, particularly the table as it exists. And when you look at this, imagine if I were to put a nice little marble right there, a blue one, a pretty blue one, like one of those tiger eye ones. Don't you get the idea that that marble would roll off the table right towards us? Moreover, if you put a marble back here in the back of the room, that they would all fall this way. The space doesn't quite look right. Now, I have a question for you. Do you see the flying naked baby Jesus? And if you don't, it's because you haven't looked closely yet. Coming through the window, carrying a little wooden cross, is the flying naked baby Jesus. And in real life, again, this whole painting is 24 inches tall. And so if we were to break this thing down into like a series of 24s, so make it into inches, this is maybe 2.5 or 3 inches tall. It's the size of your thumb, right? Like blazing through the window. And where's flying naked baby Jesus going? Where he's going exactly where you think he's going to go, right to Mary's womb. Now, this is a great example of a painting in the north at the exact same time that Masaccio is doing the Holy Trinity. And just because I want you to have a full and robust learning experience today, here is Masaccio's Holy Trinity. Right? There's all kinds of ways in which we can compare and contrast these, but let's start by thinking about it in regards to space. When we did the Holy Trinity and we made orthogonals, we did that by using lines established by architecture, and we took those lines, extended them through space to see where they went. And in Masaccio's paintings, both the Holy Trinity and the tribute money, those lines converged at a special place of particular importance called the vanishing point. Holy Trinity had one, the tribute money had two. This doesn't really have a vanishing point. Best case scenario, it has a vanishing area, and it certainly doesn't seem to be an area of particular compositional importance. And this doesn't mean that Campan could not have done perspective. I got to tell you, I've been teaching at a college or university for 20 years, and during those 20 years, I've taught freshmen who have all drawn the hallway during their freshman year of college. The drawing of the hallway is about linear perspective. It's not hard, right? We teach it to 18-year-olds. I would suggest to you that Robert Campon probably could have done perspective better than all of this, but I also mean to suggest that the accurately rendering of a three-dimensional surface, a three-dimensional background on a flat surface, was not important in the North broadly and to Robert Campon more specifically. It just wasn't what they were interested in. It just didn't matter. And so this is a great example of that. The construction of a perfect three-dimensional space was not that important to the artists in the North at the same time. And so if we were to think about this, think about the Arnolfini in this kind of way, right? This is the perspective of the Arnolfini portrait. I don't need to go back and do this again. We did the Arnolfini portrait when we did Artifact 1, so please go back and listen to that again if you wish. But I did orthogonals from the floorboards, well, primarily the ceiling rafters, and I did it for the floorboards as well. And they don't really converge anywhere in particular. And this isn't because it was hard. It's just because they didn't care. I mean, look at that. That's perfect. This is not. And so there's some interesting ways that we can compare Italian art and Flemish art at the same year. And again, this is 1434, but let me do this real quick. Control C, let me go up here. Well, better yet. Okay, so here we have two paintings, excuse me, done at the exact same time in two different places. And think about how we could compare and contrast them, because there are some things that are in common with them, right? Like both have the patrons, patrons, patrons. Both have Mary, but think about how they're different, right? They're different in scale, 22 feet by 10 feet, 4 foot by 2 foot. They're different in media, fresco, oil. They're different in the architectural elements that are present. This is beautiful and happy and Roman. Like, look at this. This is like, if the Renaissance is a rebirth, this is an architectural lesson waiting to happen. We have Ionic scrolls, a Doric capital. The rest of the composition has pilasters, Corinthian pilasters, to say nothing of a Roman arch and a barrel vault. Ah, classical architectural elements. And this has things taken from Bruges. And something else really important is that in the North, much more so in the South, we have an interest in symbolism, right? We have an interest in symbolism, and the granddaddy of art history, a German by the name of Erwin Panofsky, he had a very fancy phrase for this. He called it disguised symbolism. And disguised symbolism was this symbol that needed to be deciphered in order to really understand what it was, right? The lilies are a symbol for Mary. The dog is a symbol for fidelity. The basin is a symbol for the washing away of sins. The candle was a presence for the Holy Spirit. In Italy, we don't do disguised symbols. We do big, dead, crucified Christ. Like, you don't have to go to the library to understand what that symbol means. But the Netherlandish paintings, those done in Flanders, require a certain level of investigation. That's really important. And then the other thing we see in Italy that we don't see in the North is this strict adherence to an accurate rendering of the human body. That in the North, we still have bodies that look a little bit off balance, and not in a crazy way, but just in a way that is distinct from the kinds of things that we see in Italy. And so the Merode Altarpiece is such a great example because it provides us with an excellent comparison with the things that are happening with Masaccio at about the same time. So I want to switch gears a little bit and return to Jan van Eyck. And whenever I teach this at Tech, I sort of talk about my favorite bar in all of Ghent. It's called the Dual Greet, and they have allegedly 250 beers on tap, which I think is kind of cool. But they have a particular beer that you get in this glass. There are 1,000 reasons to go to Belgium, and I love Belgium. But in a few years' time, when you're ready to drink grown-up beer, Belgian beer is the best beer in the world, as far as I can tell. And so they will bring you a glass of beer, but the glass is too valuable just to let you drink from it. So they take your shoe and put it up in a basket so you can't leave with it. And I think that's pretty funny. And so that's the beer at the start of all of that, and that's the beer at the end of all of that. And so this is not far from a really cool cathedral. The key cathedral is called San Bavo, and it's the Cathedral of Ghent. And the church was built around 1350. It's right next to the trolley track, as you can sort of see here. And another cool reason to go to Belgium is the chocolates. And so there's a Leonidas chocolate shop right there. And so go in there and get some chocolate, and you're going to be in for a happy walk around the city. When I was there in 2000 and, oh gosh, when was my kid born? 2014. This is what the cathedral looked. So again, not going to get the postcard picture. I would like to talk about this object. It's called the Ghent Altarpiece, and the reason why it's called the Ghent Altarpiece is because it's in Ghent. Really creative. Although its original name was the oh golly, the Altarpiece of the Immaculate Conception. I think that's right. No, it's like the oh, where's my Jan van Eyck book? Let me run over here. The Mystical Sacrament. I didn't have to get it. The altarpiece of the Mystical Sacrament, and you can sort of see the Mystical Sacrament here. This is an ooh wee fantastic. How did that Jan van Eyck do it? Kind of polyptic, and you can sort of see here that this door closes and this door closes, and when you close it, you have this. And so we'll walk through some of these objects as a way to understand it. But this was a fun thing because when you come into this cathedral, the Ghent altarpiece is in this room over here. You walk in the church, there's a little ticket counter over here, and I think it was €4 or something. And so you walk in this room, and it's situated so that you can see the front and back of it. You have to walk around the sides to see the back because the arms are open. And this thing is way bigger than you think it is. And I'll show it to you. Well, I'll show it to you now. There it is. And you can see here that they have taken off this panel and this panel because they were cleaning this. This object has such a fascinating history. And if you haven't seen the movie The Monuments Men, it's got George Clooney in it and Matt Damon, and it's about a group of art historians with the army in World War II that were running around looking for stolen art. The movie is slightly dramatized, but the gist of it's true. And part of it involves them looking for this painting because it was stolen by the German army in 1943 and taken to Austria. And due to art history professor, woohoo, they found it. So, but now they're cleaning it. So this panel and that panel was at the Fine Art Museum and they were cleaning it. And in 2013, when I was here for the first time, I was in here and they don't let you take pictures. And I just so happened to have my backpack with me and I just so happened to have my computer in it. And so I opened up my computer and I went to my file of pictures of the Ghent altarpiece. You're going to see many of them today. And I went to a gentleman who was working there, who was the no photo guy. And I said, listen, I don't want a picture of this object. I want a picture of this object as it exists in this space. I have every picture of this that I would ever need or want. So I don't need a picture of the God, the crown of God. I've got it. Can I just take a picture of this as it looks like in this space because I'm an art history professor? And he said, sure, you can do that. So I did that, and here's that picture. So these are the things I do for your good learning environment. Although if you don't want to pay, you can go see the little fake one that's just outside the door. It doesn't have the same affect about it, but it's certainly, I guess, an accurate, although minuscule representation of what we're looking at. So let's talk about the front and then we'll talk about the back and I'll show you some of those pictures that I'm so very proud of. So on the left-hand side, we have a representation of Adam. Here he is, Adam after the fall. His name is even listed. And I call your attention to that beard. That, my friends, is an oil painting beard. And above Adam in this little roundel here. And again, this has been painted to look like he's a statue in a like a little like niche. Like, and this is like a carved statue, is a depiction of Cain and Abel, right? So on one side, Adam, and again, Adam is shown with a fig leaf over his goodness because this is after the fall, right? So after the fall, people become aware of their sinful nature. On the other side, we have Eve. Eve is holding the fruit of knowledge, which is the cause of our sin. She also has downcast eyes, a sense of sadness about her. And in the niche above her, we have Cain and Abel, the children of Adam and Eve. And we don't get long into humankind before we have our first murder. And so that's what is present here. Our first murder, Cain slew Abel. On either side of Adam and Eve, we have our choir of angels. And for me, this is the funniest part of the painting. Here are our angels singing, and these are pretty funny looking angels. Like this one just hit a bad note. That one hit a bad note. But think about the detail, the brushwork precision detail that goes into the creation of just, for example, their crowns or the brocades around their neck. This was not a painted in one day, like a fresco painting, a giornata. This is it took you all day to paint this part of the composition kind of painting. On the other side of the painting, we have our orchestra of choirs. This is kind of a harpsichord. This is like a viola gamba and what is a lute or a harp of some kind. So we have angels singing, angels playing music, and this seems to be the kind of thing that angels should do. To the left of God the Father, we have Mary, and Mary is wearing an all blue uniform. Mary has a crown with lilies and carnation. Pardon me, Mary is reading her book, and Mary has an exceedingly extravagant halo around her. I mean, just think about the detail that goes into this garment. Wowza. That is just absolutely fantastic. And on the other side, we have John the Baptist. John the Baptist is also often shown wearing this hair shirt. And if you didn't know, here it says Baptista Johannes Major. So the great John the Baptist, right? Light radiating from his head. And both of those guys are fantastic, but they pale in comparisons to the magnificence of God the Almighty, who sits here in judgment, his hand raised in blessing, holding a scepter, a crown at his feet, and another crown on his head. And for me, this is one of the most breathtaking examples of oil paint precision that I can show you today. Like, this has been painted with such precision that you can identify the direction of the light, right? And of course, light is all constructed in a painting. This is an artificial painting with artificial light, but the light is coming, well, let's see, from this direction, isn't it? Because the highlights are on those parts of the pearls. I mean, if you were to count how many pearls are on God's crown alone, I bet you would get to the dozens. And everyone has crowns. This is just fantastic. Underneath it, we have the Lamb here, the Holy Spirit there, and people who have all come to see the Lamb. And it's hard to make out in this detail here, but there's a chalice at the chest of the Lamb, and he's been pierced by the heart, and blood is coming into that chalice. And so this is the front of the composition. But the back is quite nearly as cool. Over here, look, it's Bob and Susanna. They're our patrons. Like think about how smart you are now. You look at this right away and you realize it's our patrons. On the left-hand side, we have this. It's St. John the Baptist, Johannes Bapt. There he's labeled. And over here, this is St. John the Beloved, St. John the Evangelist. And we've looked at St. John the Evangelist before. Let me go back and show you because I will be consistent. Here he is. Saint John the Evangelist, or the Beloved, often shown at the crucifixion of Christ. And here he is. And so just call your attention to that. And then this one here, I'll show you the detail. Long curly hair, slightly soft skin, full cheeks. Up above here, we have our angel and Mary. We have another Annunciation scene. How about that? And so this Ghent altarpiece is a polyptych, and as this image here shows you, it's a big painting, right? These are all individual panels linked together, but conceived of as a unified whole. You know, in the Monuments Men movie, George Clooney says something about this being one of the foundational images of the West. And it's sort of hard to argue with that. Like this, you know, this is probably the most important Flemish painting of the 15th century. And I'm not sure anybody would really argue with that. Like I'm not a Flemish expert, but I bet this is the most important painting of Belgium of the 15th century. And there are many great ones. Like I'd love to show you this one by Roger van der Weyden. And this is called The Deposition. It's from The Passion of Christ. Of course, there are scenes of very popular scenes of Christ's life taken from Good Friday. Like the Last Supper is on Holy Thursday. He's crucified on Good Friday and rises again in fulfillment of the scriptures on Easter Sunday. And Friday is a very active day in the life of Christ, right? He's taken before Pilate. He's judged. He carries the cross of a mountain. He's crucified. And this is a painting of the removal of Christ from that cross. It's called a deposition. And I want to call your attention to the overall shallowness of this picture plane. We have a front line here, right? We have a background there. And this even speaks to the distance there. And doesn't this seem to be remarkably shallow? That in this composition, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 back here, 8, 9, 10 figures all crammed into this really shallow picture plane, and this elongated Christ sort of brightly lit, being carried down from the cross. And this looks like a different kind of a deposition than what we've seen before. I mean, here is his upper body, his lower body being brought downwards. I'll come back to this in just a second. To say nothing of Mary, who has been shown crying, pallid in color. All of the rosiness of her cheeks has been completely illuminated. You can see here's the cross. The cross is often shown with a skull at it, sort of a reminder that this was the burial site of Adam, and Christ is the new Adam. If Adam was our first man, then Christ is the first man in the second part of the Christian faith tradition. And then the figures around all of this have been shown with sorrow and lamentation and grief about them. Right? Here's St. John the Beloved again, curly hair. I want to call your attention to this right here. And think about this this sort of space there and what that sort of looks like. And then keep looking. Keep looking. So if you were to look at this shape here, this architectural shape around the frame, doesn't that sort of look like a crossbow a little bit? I mean, and I would say this is the kind of weapon that Chewbacca uses in Star Wars, but no one really knows who Chewbacca was anymore. I guess maybe a little. And then I call your attention to that right there. And that, oh, that is another crossbow. And so this gets us to the patrons of this object, and such an important idea in the North, but in Italy as well, and that is art makers would often be commissioned by guilds of men to complete a painting for their meeting space or for a church. And there would often be a little symbol that speaks to that group. And so this painting, the deposition, was paid for by the Crossbowmen's Guild. And I believe it was in Leuven, but I'm not certain about that. But imagine, in Leuven, there is a guild of crossbowmen, and there's 100 of them, and they all put in $10 a piece. So they all raise, $1,000 and they say, we want Van der Weyden to paint this. We want it to go in the cathedral. And when people look at this, they will think about the good work of our guild as well. Certainly, the good work of Christ and Mary, but also there's a reason why that is there. And that's because these paintings did important publicity for the groups who commissioned them. And of course, Van der Weyden got publicity too. And so this is a great example of the kinds of things that are happening in the middle part of the 15th century in parts of what is now Belgium. So from Robert Quempin to Van Eyck to Van der Weyden, we can see the ways in which these works look different than the kinds of things happening in Italy at the exact same time. But before we get too far away from Italy, we will return there for our next artifact.